Call this public meeting to order. Would you join me in the pledge? So if you haven't already, wouldn't mind signing in, would be great, and make your cell phone be quiet. Do we have any public announcements? Seeing none. Any public comment on items not on the agenda? All right, our current claims. Claims received as of November 27th, 2019 to December 4th, 2019 by the Commissioner's Office total $2,100,026. $484,085. All right, we have four public hearings. Let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 public hearings. Did I get that right? We will start with a budget amendment for Missoula County for Justice Court. Is Amanda here? No. And make sure you say who you are.
Hi. I'm Amy McGee, the Court Administrator for Missoula County Justice Court, representing Judge Holloway, and Amanda couldn't make it today. So we are asking the Board of County Commissioners approve the budget amendment for Justice Court. This is a result of receiving a $109,775 grant from the Montana Department of Transportation. The funds will solely be used for road court, Missoula County's DUI treatment court. There's no fiscal impact or cost to Missoula County, and DUI treatment courts reduce jail incarceration time. They hold defendants accountable and have a holistic approach on addressing the underlying issues. The money will be used to increase our half-time DUI court coordinator to 3/4 time and allow us to accept more participants in the program.
Great.
Are there any other questions or comments from folks in the audience?
I think it's a great thing and good job coming up with some private money too.
Yeah.
Or money that isn't ours
Yeah.
to keep this moving forward. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Well, then I'm going to make this motion, Amy, that we approve the amendment for the Missoula County Justice Court to the amount of $109,774.56. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Another budget amendment. Exploring options for uninsured residents.
I'm Michelle Denman, and I'm with the Finance Department. And this budget amendment, it's to provide funding for the Missoula Benefits Exploring Options for Uninsured Residents. It's a $25,000 grant, and the funds are expected to actually be received this week. So we're looking to segregate the activity a little bit in regards to this budget amendment, where this budget amendment really pertains just to the revenue portion, and the expenditure portion would be an additional amendment that would come forward later on once the planning and the information has been really analyzed as to how to move forward with this process. So at this time, we'd like you to approve the resolution to add this grant money.
Great. Can you maybe explain the program a bit, or do you know?
I can.
Okay, thank you. Then-
I wrote the damn grant. I did. I did.
Thanks for laughing.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, that makes me feel better. Thanks. Yeah. So at Missoula County, we are not just self-insured, but self-administered, which is quite rare. I think we're the only municipality in the state that's like this. That means not only do we put up the money to provide health insurance for our employees, But we do all the explanation of benefits and create the arrangements with providers so we can actually have a program. Because we do this in-house, we save a tremendous amount of money. We don't have to make a profit through healthcare administration, as does Blue Cross or Blue Shield. We were curious if we were able to offer this same service and access to the physical access to Partnership for Health Clinic, Partnership Health, PHC, to other Missoula County residents who don't qualify for federal health insurance programs and are employed. Otherwise, they wouldn't qualify. So, and don't get health insurance from their employers. So we're talking about a thin band of Missoulians. So we're going to do what we're going to use this $25,000 for is to cover the cost of some actuarial studies to find out how many folks are out there who fit this. They don't get health insurance from their employer. They don't qualify for federal programs. And could we bring them into the county's program? They would have to pay for it. They would pay premiums. But could we absorb them? Is this possible? So that's what we're going to do with the $25,000, is figure out if it's possible.
I'm super excited and
Yeah,
so
I'm really
grateful
excited about
for
it too.
your crayon.
Yeah, it was it was a grant written on a Sunday in a crayon. Thanks
So
for bringing this, Michelle.
I guess are there other questions or people have comments about it? Then I move that we approve a budget amendment to add a new fund for Missoula Benefits Exploring Options for Uninsured Residents.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. There we go.
Thanks.
Thanks. Sarah.
Hi, how are you guys? I'm Sarah Heineman from the Health Department. I'm here for Kara Hansen to request that the board approve the budget amendment for the temporary nurse supervision for Riverstone Health Nurse Family Partnership Program. Kara had brought the contract back in October, so we're just catching up with the budget amendment. And our Nurse Family Partnership, as you guys might be aware, is a joint partnership through Billings, Butte, Lewis and Clark, and Missoula. And so we have supervision in Helena and here, and Billings traditionally has supervision for their site, and then Butte. They had an unexpected supervisor who left a vacancy, but they were able to hire internally. And so the plan was for Kara to provide that temporary supervision for that period of vacancy while they were trying to get their new person trained. And so this is a small amount of money, a little over $3,000, and I don't anticipate we'll even invoice them for that full amount because they had an internal candidate who was able to step in much more quickly than we
that's great.
anticipated. So, yeah, we're nearly to the end of it. So.
I move to approve the budget amendment to receive and spend up to $3,040.38 from Riverstone Health.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Nurse
Sarah.
Family Partnership's great.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
So I'm here to talk to, my name's Chris Hansberry. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the county. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about a no parking resolution, but before we begin that, I'm going to ask Deputy County Attorney John Hart just to explain the process that we use for creating no parking zones and the legal structure through which we do that.
Thanks, Chris. Commissioners, as you're well aware, we have, as a county, enacted not a few new parking resolutions recently. And as I have watched that process and tried to fine tune it, I've decided that we might want to follow a little bit different procedure in how we adopt these parking resolutions and regulations. So we call them resolutions because in the code, at Title 7, Chapter 14, 2106, it says the Board of County Commissioners has jurisdiction and power to establish by resolution parking regulations. So, as I put these together and as I've seen them enacted since as early as the 1990s, they've been called resolutions.
Sure.
Could they be called ordinances too? Yeah, they could be called ordinances, and they would have exactly the same force and effect under law.
I didn't
But-
know we could do ordinances.
But because the the legislature has said, we want you to call these things resolutions. That's what we always call them. The only substantive difference between a resolution and an ordinance has a little bit more process involved. It requires 2 public hearings that are separated by at least 12 days. And then if a ordinance is enacted by the commissioners, it cannot take effect until 30 days after the day that it has been adopted. So what I'm advising that we do with, there's nothing improper with the way that we've enacted any of the parking resolutions in the past, but just as an abundance of caution going forward, I'm going to advise that we follow the process that we would be required to enact an ordinance. And so today's hearing will be the first hearing on this particular parking resolution. We will have another hearing, I believe, on either January 2nd or actually January 30th. So that's way more than 12 days. And then if this resolution's adopted on January 30th, it won't take effect for another 30 days after that.
Okay.
So
Thanks for that
I
clarification.
hope that makes sense, and I just think that's a prudent way to move going forward.
Right.
So-
Thanks.
Yeah, so with that, I'll give you a quick overview of this area. So what we're looking at is a request from citizens in the Butler Creek and DeSmet Road area for a no overnight parking resolution. This is property that is just to the west of the development park that was recently annexed into the city limits.
I'm sorry, can we zoom out and?
Zoom out, I can't because it's an
I'm
exhibit.
sorry,
I'm sorry. But what I'm happy to do, what you can see just above this is Interstate 90 is what's running kind of parallel along the top of the screen. I know that doesn't help very much. And in just a second, Commissioner Vero, I'll be able to switch to the internet, and then I can pull this in a little bit different way that'll give you a better orientation to where we're talking about.
Thanks.
Yep. So this is just west of where the city completed its annexation. If you're looking at the map, the property that is just to the north below the interstate that you can see, if I can get my mouse to move here, here we go. This is animal control. If you're familiar with the county's animal control building is on Butler Creek, and this is the school and the baseball property where the baseball diamond is for the school district in this area. And so the city has actually annexed right here to Butler Creek Road as part of their annexation. And so what we've seen is because when the city does that annexation, they automatically brought in their parking regulations and their camping regulations. What we've seen is a shift from that industrial area into the industrial area just to the west of that. And so the property owners out there have experienced some problems with overnight camping blocking access in and out of property, as well as the ability for them to show on occasion some of the property that they have for sale in that development area. So they're requesting an extension of no overnight parking along Interstate Place, which is the road to the north that you're seeing, and then along the rest of Expressway, which is that kind of line that makes almost an S, but not quite an S for us, and then including DeSmet Road, which is the road to the extreme west right here. And so basically what you'd be creating is a square, a little more than a square here that would cover this area of the industrial park that's not yet inside the city limits. I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's what we're looking at. And again, that will be, this is the first hearing of that, and we'll take public comment for the next a little more than 30 days and because of the holidays, which will take us out to January 30th. And at that time, the property owners will be here as well to answer questions. And I'm happy to switch now that from this exhibit here really quick, Commissioner Vero, and I can give you a little bit better overview, I think, if I can get to the property information system.
Thanks. And then I was also kind of wondering what happened, I'll wait to north of DeSmet Road, that green space, or it doesn't look like there's buildings there.
There is not. There's quite a bit of property still in this particular area that's for sale and is not yet developed in that same area. And that's been part of the challenge for the property owners there is getting access into their land. There we go. There's Butler Creek. And so I can show you a few pictures of some of the challenges they face, but this is Expressway in the area that we were talking about. This is the part that's been incorporated into the city limits. This is the animal control building right here next to the interstate. And then this is DeSmet Road running right here, Interstate Place, and the rest of Expressway. And so the property owners that we've spoken with are the property owners basically along this section of DeSmet who own these pieces of property, as well as this piece of property up here that's for sale, and a few in this industrial area. And looking at just, these are some of the vehicles that have recently been parked. This particular vehicle was actually in the vacant lot that you were asking about, Commissioner Vero, was actually driven up onto private property in the area of Expressway. It was
north of the
actually parked
railroad tracks?
right here,
Okay. Oh, and
actually in
I'm,
this area.
I'm sorry, I'm
Are you looking
further
here?
south. What happens there?
So this area that's to the south that looks like green space is actually the railroad right-of-way. And so it is private property, and MRL posts there for people, and actually even vehicles can be trespassed from that location. So it's a little different than a public road.
Got
It's
it,
not a public
thanks.
road.
Okay. So back to your photos.
Yeah, so there were a few, like I said, a few things, and they've had problems where vehicles have actually been brought right up onto the private property of some of the owners there. This is a shot looking back towards animal control from where that camper was that I just showed, that abandoned Winnebago, and you can see there's other vehicles that have been parked along the roadway and just kind of left in that same area, making it difficult for folks to access the property that they own.
Do we have any of the nearby property owners here?
I do not believe we do at this meeting, so
Okay.
but we will have them here at the January 30th
Okay.
meeting.
So I'm going to guess then there's no public comment on this either.
And do we know anything about the owners of the vehicles or the folks that are using them?
So there have been contact with them. Animal control as well as environmental health have been working with them. As you saw in that picture of the Winnebago, there was quite a bit of refuse that was left in the area and stuff. So they've been working with both the landowners and some of the folks who've been in those vehicles to help clear that up. The Winnebago actually has been removed. That was removed by the junk vehicle program, but the folks did go back and clean up some of the garbage, and then environmental health cleaned up the rest of that. As part of their work. And so, but there are some folks who've been out and they've talked to them. The sheriff's department has been out and interacted with these folks as well, attempting to find them services, but so far without success.
Okay, thanks.
So John, do we keep this hearing open for a month?
Or I think you can just continue it.
Just-
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's obviously open, and Missoula County would receive written comment from anybody between now and January 30th.
Okay.
But people are welcome to come on January 30th and provide public comment here at the hearing.
Great. All right. So we're all.
Okay, and I guess I don't mean to put you on the spot, April, but I was I was just, do you guys have any further information on these folks, or do you know anything about?
Well, I know I'm in contact.
Oh, I'm sorry, come on up. Yeah.
So you got to introduce yourself.
I'm April Seat, and I just work for Hope Rescue Mission, part of the coordinated outreach team. I know I'm in contact with one of the folks that are staying out there, so we are working hard to try and get something more permanent. I know that, I mean, it's just a process. We're looking for birth certificates and trying to tie, documentation together to be able to help them move forward. So,
Yeah, just to, my name is
say
Jake
who-
Lapke. I am part of the coordinated outreach team. I operate the PATH program at Western Montana Mental Health Center. So a lot of our participants in the program are homeless by nature, and that's a requirement for the program. So we're familiar with these individuals, and it's just a problem of, capacity. Where do these individuals place their RVs in a spot that still provides them with shelter? But also is not an overburden to the community, to the county, to the city. And so we're just trying to facilitate something that provides them with shelter, but also is not overly cumbersome to municipalities. So we're just here to listen and try to formulate a reasonable solution for both parties.
And at least just share that we are actively, like, every week meeting on these issues as far as like, what are we gonna do with this entire situation with those who are experiencing homelessness? And they are on our radar. They are someone that we are actively like meeting about, having discussions, and what can we do to just help them move forward or move out of these spaces into more permanent situations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks. All right, then we will keep this hearing open till January 30th. Great. Thanks a lot. So our next one, Ponderosa Heights, and we'll start with a staff report from our very own Tim Worley. Oh, they canceled. Oh, do I? Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Tim Worley with CAPS, and this is Ponderosa Heights, Phase 4, a major subdivision in Lolo. The applicant is MTV Construction. They are represented by Territorial Landworks. The project is on the northwest side of Lolo. It's 20-plus acres. Last week, we went over a brief history of Ponderosa Heights as a multi-phase subdivision where phases 1, 2, 2A, and phase 3 all filed between 2006 and 2007. Ponderosa Heights Phase 4 never was filed as a final plat, and that's why this project comes before you as a new subdivision. It ends up being about 2 homes per acre. We talked a lot about roads last week. Coulter Pine is the road that's proposed to be extended as a 28-foot wide road. The big road in question is Jack Pine Court, that dual cul-de-sac road on the southern edge there that's proposed at a 20-foot width. That does require a variance. Staff, Planning Board, and Public Works recommend denial of that variance, mainly for purposes of emergency egress, considering that this is in the wildland-urban interface. One of our concerns is that there's been an increase in fuel load in this location since the mid-50s. And in summary, we recommend that the 28-foot width be the standard for how Jack Pine Court is built. We also talked about block length variance, which staff does support. The main block in this subdivision exceeds the 450-foot standard. We could see no reasonable means of further dividing this block. And Planning Board felt the same way in their deliberations, and therefore we recommend approval of that variance. There's a single way out of this subdivision which also requires a variance. Originally with Ponderosa Heights, a second way out was prescribed, and we felt with this subdivision that it's far enough down the hill that it really doesn't apply with this new application. However, we support the variance mainly due to topographic reasons. It would be hard to build a second way out for this subdivision. The county park to the south has been explored as a second way out and has not been found to be viable. We also feel that there's other mitigating issues here, such as landscape treatments that help in the wildland-urban interface context, and use of non-flammable materials for the homes, which I'll speak to in a second. There's a variance requested to an 8-foot wide sidewalk requirement for sidewalks on one side of subdivision roads. That was a variance also supported by staff and Planning Board. Parks and open space was a big issue of discussion last week. There is a 0.07 of an acre common area connector on the southern edge which would contain a 5-foot wide pathway to that park that I pointed to. However, there's still a requirement for 82 hundredths of an acre to be donated or cash in lieu of parkland. That's despite the fact that there's over 8 acres that were dedicated as common area as part of Ponderosa Heights. The commissioners felt there had to be some equitable approach to this issue so that cash in lieu wouldn't be required. So what was discussed, and I'll skip that slide for a second, was the potential for a waiver option that actually comes straight out of state law, where the governing body can waive the park dedication requirement if the subdivider provides land outside the subdivision, affording long-term protection of critical wildlife habitat, cultural, historical, or natural resources, agricultural interests, or aesthetic values. So what was forwarded from Paul Forsting of TLI is protection of a portion of the gully, which would be off-site. We feel this could be accomplished in the form of a deed restriction. So Paul and I have been trading concepts back and forth, and what we have is a condition requiring a deed restriction to be filed related to Certificate of Survey 5774, Parcel 5A, which is the parcel immediately to the north. The deed restriction would prohibit development and promote natural resource values of the area, and we would review the language of the final document. And the deed restricted area would be illustrated by an exhibit, and presumably it could be this exhibit. It would just be filed with the deed restriction. And the remaining portion of the gully would be added for restriction at such time as parcel 5A of Certificate of Survey 5774 is developed. So that would be the other portion of the gully adjacent to this red area here. The deed restriction would run with the real property and could only be revoked by the county commissioners in agreement with the landowner. So commissioners, if you go in this direction, there would not be a cash in lieu of parkland requirement. So what we would recommend is that you would strike condition number 10, which is the requirement for cash in lieu of parkland, if you go in the direction of supporting this concept. Now, just going back a couple slides, I think there was a question that came up last time. What about a parkland variance? We did deliberate about that issue, and we felt that a variance, that they weren't eligible for a variance because this is an essential state law requirement. It would be like asking for a variance from legal and physical access or some fundamental requirement under subdivision. But I think we found something that will work with the deed restriction concept for this off-site area, which I think is around 1.21 acres, something like that. Paul Forsting can confirm what that is, if that's a question. So back to some of the other fundamental issues, and this is somewhat of a repeat, but I'll just go over these issues quickly. Because of the wildland-urban interface context, we are recommending Class A roofing, and I think the developers actually volunteered the non-flammable siding and decks, but that's sort of enshrined as part of the recommended approval. And we're also recommending a defensible space management plan. So that would mean defensible space has to be created within 100 feet of roads and hydrants. There would be clearing of down fuels, adequate tree spacing and limbing. And the homeowners association would be in charge of the public facilities like roads and fire hydrants, keeping them cleared from fuels. And then lot owners would be in charge of private improvements, basically the fuels on individual lots as building permits come in one by one. Fire hydrants will be extended to this subdivision, and Missoula Rural actually has a station on the south side of Lolo, under 2 miles from this location. We received limited public comment, but one person voiced opposition to on-street parking on Coulter Pine Street, and a lot owner to the south was concerned about loss of privacy for existing residents and potential drainage issues. Those comments are attached to your staff report. Planning Board deliberated a handful of issues, including the parkland dedication issue. They expressed some concern about one-way in and out, but ultimately supported having the single way out as, and supported the variance essentially. They discussed the road width for Jack Pine Court and felt that it should be that full 28-foot width. In summary, their motions were consistent with staff's recommendations. Staff and Planning Board recommend subdivision approval, and we have a total of 5 motions, 4 motions with regard to subdivision standards, and the 5th motion is the main motion for approval.
What about condition number 10? Is that, if we were to strike condition number 10, where does that fall?
You could just make a motion to that effect to strike condition 10, and then when you go to your main motion, you could just say based on the findings of fact in the staff report and subject to the recommended conditions of approval as amended.
Okay. And then I think I asked about this before, but I missed the last meeting. What did drainage issues mean?
I'm not entirely sure what the concern was, and the person with the comment is, let me zoom out a little bit. I think there might be some concern by folks to the south that they're losing what they perceive as open space. But I didn't really see any specifics with regard to why they feel that drainage should be a problem.
Like, were they worried about development to the north of them flowing into their property?
believe
Is that
so.
what that means? Or I wasn't sure draining where, draining into the gully or, yeah. Oh, you guys, okay. Paul, do you have? Oh, sorry. Okay.
Maybe I could sneak in just real quick.
Yeah.
Attachment E of your staff report. The local, and I'm reading down a couple sentences. This is from Shannon Bolton. The local sewer district has a storm runoff culvert running through our eastern property line from south to north downgrade, which currently empties directly behind our lot via a trench running through my backyard. This would in turn flow into lot 79, which is proposed. So I guess maybe the flow would be the opposite direction.
Sorry, I'm just reading along too. Let's just see if I can find it.
Lot 79 is immediately adjacent to, let's see, actually it's here, adjacent to the cul-de-sac, one of the cul-de-sacs.
Okay, and the trench she's talking about runs south of that?
And I've walked the site, but I'm not aware of that feature.
Okay. Okay. Paul, you're on the edge of your seat.
As soon as he's ready to go.
Yeah, I don't know that I have additional information on that.
Thanks,
Okay.
Tim. Are you good? Thanks for your report, Tim. Applicant's representative.
Paul Forsting, Territorial Landworks. I don't have a slide on drainage, so maybe I'll just start right there. It's not uncommon for neighbors when they provide comments to say something like, be mindful of my drainage, because drainage does get impacted when you develop. What they probably don't know is the level of review that the county does do with drainage. They do look at existing features and they do determine what our impact will be and how that might impact those features. We could, in this case, attach this comment or make sure Public Works gets a copy of it. But if there's an actual trench that's for drainage on their site, it'll be how we interact with that will be considered and reviewed by the County Public Works Department. We'll have an overall drainage plan for the subdivision, and then there'll be individual lot drainage plans. So it'll be considered quite a bit. And that always hasn't been the case. And so folks who say there are situations, especially on hillsides, where drainage causes problems. And so it's a fair comment to have there. But I'm confident that through the review process, it'll be addressed. And if there is something to be fine tuned in that area, we'll do it. Yeah, absolutely. We're required to do that. So we have yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's my drainage spiel. I'm going to go through my presentation as promptly and hopefully as clearly as Tim did. He did a good job of highlighting the items we talked about last week. Had we had the same commission, and I would avoid doing that, but just to make sure everybody's on the same page, I'm going to go through my slides real quick here. Maybe I'll start. My second discussion here will be about the parks, because that's how I started with my first slide. We left our meeting saying, gosh, this is great. We have an opportunity to be relieved of the parkland cash and lieu requirement. I'll go through my slides showing what we already provided and kind of how we got to this point. But since this is my first slide, I'll say that Tim was right. It is an acre, 1.21 acres that we're proposing to put a deed restriction on. It makes up the whole eastern part of the gully. We actually erred on the side of caution by going over. When you follow a gully, it's kind of like this. It weaves back and forth. We tried to make it as straight as possible for the benefit of my surveyors, because they have to do meets and bounds descriptions of things like this. And so it's larger than half the gully, but not much. Ed, let me know if there's any questions on it. We showed it in red here, and yeah, we would use this as an exhibit, maybe add some dimensions on it just so it's very clear where it exists. And this would be attached to a legal easement document, or excuse me, legal deed restriction document. Here's the overall subdivision plan that was approved originally for the project. You'll see the hatching on the phases of the project that were already filed. So this is just kind of an overview of the project. We'll look at it again in a couple of my slides. I have some slides here on fire safety. That was one of the main talking points at the planning board in our first commissioners hearing. This is the end of the road as we'll be connecting to. And so you can see how the development looks after houses are there. You can see there's not many trees it's generally turf. And so they just kind of see that. And then this star is that house that doesn't show up on this aerial. But you'll note that houses will, I guess in the nicest way possible, they'll displace all these trees in here. There won't be a lot of trees within the site left. Talking to folks who build out there, they say, people generally pick a tree or two that they want to keep and it fits nice with their yard, and then they realize, gosh, probably shouldn't have kept it because there's all sorts of pine needles and things for maintenance that folks get to do for the rest of their living there. But when we talk about fire safety, yes, there is a lot of trees on the site, but a majority of those trees will come off when we build our road in, and then when we have actual sites developed. This is what the site looks like in a bigger context. We're at the edge of Lolo, very much so. To the south of us is kind of the hill. I don't know what the name of the mountain or hill is that everybody lives on in Lolo. And we're directly adjacent to that. We do have a lot of trees on our site, and there is this gully next to us. But then if you look across kind of the greater area, it's more grassland and less heavy forest, and like you might see up against national forest lands. Paul Rosenall, the original developer, he's not here today, but his family owns all of this land, owned all of the Ponderosa land, and they have done thinning activity in this area and is committed to continuing to do that. Here's the fire hazard assessment that we submitted with the application. In this assessment, you'll note that our score ended up being 38. A moderate hazard would be 40 or above, and so we're below the moderate hazard. That's a good thing from our standpoint in that we when scored for how dangerous our site might be, we're below the moderate hazard category. We fill out a good portion of this application, and then the county now, the county fire inspector fills it out. And so our combined score between us and the fire inspector kept us below moderate. We did have a site visit with Tim and Caps, and then Max Rebholz. He's the wildfire preparedness coordinator from Missoula County's Office of Emergency Management. We had that site visit in October. I believe it was the 24th. Yep. And here's the summary from there. And in that summary, you're not finding anything that says this is a terrible place for development. It says development's going to take down a lot of these trees, and some of the largest trees are adapt to fire. And so what we need to do is make sure we have some defensible spaces, and some other recommendations are in this memo, I guess you'd call it, and we're following all of those. And so I feel like we're in good shape there. In summary, we're going to have hydrants up here. We're going to have large new roads. There'll be no dead ends. We have less than a moderate hazard. For whatever it's worth, we have underground utilities, and that does impact your fire score if you don't. We are proposing non-combustible siding, decking, roofing materials. We will have a defensible space and maintenance plan. And we didn't, at the end of the day, receive any negative fire-related agency comments, which is an important aspect of review. Moving on to our kind of maybe second main talker, or third, is our request for 20 feet on Jack Pine Road. This is the kind of the end of the road. This is the end of the development, and we're asking for 20 feet for this stretch here. That's what it was originally approved as. When we go to the fire hazard, I just wanted to point out that when you get rated for how your development scores for fire, if you have a 20-foot road or more, that's the maximum number of, that's the best the hazard assessment would, I guess, give you. It doesn't give you more points if it's 30, or so. From our opinion, it's not any less safe to have a 20 than a 30 as far as assessment goes of fire hazard. This is what that looks like, a 20-foot road. We have two 10-foot drive lanes, 2-foot shoulders, and curb and gutter. If the variance isn't approved, the change will only amount in an 8-foot strip of parking on one side. And so that's really what we're talking about. Should we be required to have an 8-foot lane for parking? We're requesting that we don't, but that would be what is required if we are denied. Here is the road that we're talking about, Jack Pine. I've also shown in shaded blue all of the other 20-foot roads that exist within the subdivision. The green road is Coulter Pine, and that's a 28-foot width, and we're staying consistent with that. We're just asking that this stretch here be 20 feet like these other project roads. Here's what those roads look like from the aerial. One point of emphasis is that the regulations changed, and our cul-de-sac widths have to be wider. And we are proposing to go to that wider cul-de-sac width. It amounts to about 20 feet of extra pavement from what the other cul-de-sacs in the project were designed and approved, constructed with. We will build larger cul-de-sacs at the end of Jack Pine Court, and so from getting vehicles in and out, as this will help that. Here's some photos of what these 20-foot roads look like. One important area of emphasis is that our 20-foot road will not allow parking. These 20-foot roads allow parking on both sides, which is I think that's a much more constrained roadway than what we're proposing. And when people do park on it, it can get constrained because we take a 20-foot roadway and you put an 8-foot car there, and then you can see that there's less and less travel surface as you park here. But as you can see from these photos, not many folks even park there. Everybody's got large garages. People have large spaces in front of their garages. And so really getting out into the street to park is a rare occurrence out here. Here's some more photos of these 20-foot roads. And again, this is what we would like to have. We would just have no parking signs on them. So on to parkland dedication, we kind of went to the conclusion, but going back to the beginning of the discussion, with the initial subdivision, over 8 acres were dedicated for parkland. And those were all filed in the first phase. One little segment of parkland was saved for this phase, but the majority of the parkland was filed with phases 1 and 2. I believe the requirement for parkland was something 4.5 acres or so. So I believe we're comfortably 4 acres over what was required to be dedicated. Here are the conclusions of law and findings of facts regarding that. Just pointing out that this was required for, the parkland was required for 102 single dwelling residential subdivision, and our 22 lots here are part of those. And so I was just trying to make sure everybody understood the link between our project and that parkland. Here's more information on it. And I think I did make the link at the last meeting, so I don't need to, I guess we could come back to any of this if we want to go back through it. But, when you read this, it says, hey, you can donate this parkland at each phase, or you can do it at phase 1. We did it all at phase 1, and I think that was an important point to point out, that it could have been done in phases, and had it been done in phases, we would have been clearly consistent with the requirements. Here is a picture of an over an acre. The primary park in Ponderosa is right here. It's irrigated. They planted trees there. It's used relatively heavily, given that there's no facilities in there, but folks bring their dogs over. We have apartments here. And I was just wondering today as I drove by if all the folks in the apartments across the street are going to make their way over. And I know we've got the HOA guy here, and he probably is going to say not if he has anything to do with it. But it is a pretty heavily used park, and it's in a good location for people to use it. It makes sense to have it in this nice flat area with all these apartment buildings around it. That is in this corner here, but we do have other areas of parkland that were provided, and these areas are more natural, and they connect with a larger pattern of parks that were dedicated in the area and provided to the county. Here's what those look like. They're something like 5 or 6 acres of park land that's right adjacent and connecting to our site. And so the concept being that we would add to that kind of wildlife open space corridor, definitely more of a passive park area, but a park area nonetheless. And then we have our active parkland area here, the flat irrigated spot. In addition to that parkland, there was an agreement and a condition from the initial subdivision that said, you need to put a deed restriction on the adjacent land that Paul Rosenau owns for a future park that would be on a flat spot. And the reason that was put there is they recognize that there's a good flat spot on the bottom, and it'd be nice to have another flat spot where a lot of the houses are. And so a deed restriction was placed on the adjacent property here for some future park that needs to be connected with public right-of-way, and it needs to be flat. Those are the terms of that deed restriction. And so not only did we dedicate all that parkland, but we do have this agreement for another park somewhere up in here at some time when this is developed. There's no schedule for development there. Paul owns it, and he doesn't talk about it being in his lifetime, and so who knows when that park will be realized. But there is an agreement in place that will at some point be realized for another flat park up here. The last thing I would point out is we do have a thin strip of parkland provided in this phase. I've shown it in yellow here. It will provide a trail to another adjacent common area that's owned by the county, and that's considered a park as well. And so that's my last slide. I do have other slides here, and I'd be glad to go over anything in more detail. So thank you so much. I appreciate it, and let me know how I can help.
Do you have anything to? Oh, yes.
No. Any public comment?
And I wasn't.
Questions or comments?
Yeah, I wasn't at the last meeting, so do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I thought the last meeting went really well, and that we were faced with what seemed to be a procedural obstacle where the spirit of the law, but not the letter of the law, had been met, and that this was this multi-phase subdivision. So much time went by before phase 4 could happen. It actually is its own new subdivision at this point. Unfortunately, all this parkland dedication happened at the beginning. So there actually was enough parkland for this whole subdivision, but because of the timing, it didn't work. And I thought Dave did a really good job of seeing through this and working with Paul to come up with a creative solution. Fortunately, at that meeting, Mr. Rosignol was here and said, hey, I have this gully here that we can work out. So it seemed like a good solution. And John also kind of pointed the way legally as, can we just waive this thing? And that turned out to not be the case. So, but I feel like we worked together and came up with a good compromise.
Great. Is there any other?
That's good.
Okay, well then, if there's no further discussion, and I'm going to read all 4 of these then, all 5 of these. That the request for the 20-foot road width for Jack Pine Court instead of the required 28 width, Missoula County Subdivision Regulations Table 347 be denied based on the findings of fact in the staff report and is subject to the recommended conditions of approval. And that the request for a block length exceeding 450 feet by Missoula County Subdivision Regulations, Section 3322 be approved based on the findings of fact in the staff report and subject to the recommended conditions of approval, and that the request for a single egress route instead of the required 2 access routes in the WUI as required by Missoula County Subdivision Regulations 358 be approved and based on the findings of fact in the staff report and subject to the recommended conditions of approval. And that the request for a 5-foot wide sidewalk along one side of the subdivision roads instead of the requirement for an 8-foot sidewalk along one side, or 5-foot sidewalks along both sides as required in Missoula County Subdivision Regulations 3491B1 be approved based on the findings of fact in the staff report and subject to the recommended conditions of approval. And that the Ponderosa Heights Phase 4 subdivision be approved based on the findings of fact in the staff report and subject to the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report.
Well done.
Oh,
Did you want to make a motion about the potential new condition that facilitates the waiver?
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
And I move that a deed restriction shall be recorded for the portion of parcel 5A, certificate of survey 5774, adjacent to the subdivision, subject to CAPS review and approval prior to final plat approval. The deed restriction shall prohibit development and promote the natural resource values of the area with language subject to CAPS review and approval prior to the final plat approval. The deed restriction area shall be illustrated by an exhibit. The remaining portion of the gully shall be added for restriction at such time as partial 5A of certificate of survey 5774 is developed. This deed restriction shall run with said real property and be revocable only by the mutual consent of the owner of said property and the Missoula County Board of County Commissioners.
Well done.
Okay, that was my motion.
I will second that. You have any other discussion? Sir.
So coupled with that, you'll want to strike condition
And-
10.
Yes, we do want to strike condition 10, cash in lieu of parkland.
We're good?
Now you're, is
All
that
right.
second?
So that's my, I'll still second. And any,
Oops.
If I could just put something on the record, Commissioners, there is planned to be a riprap area for, it's like a drainage outfall within that red area. And I don't know that we really need to tweak the condition. I just want it to be clear on the record that there will be some, presumably, disturbance related to the installation of that riprap within this red area. And I think that's fine. I just wanted to make sure on the record
That we know about it.
yeah, that you're aware of that.
Thank you.
thanks. All right. All in favor of this motion?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks. And I did unintentionally skip over the Pine Drive Road petition, and we are going to keep that hearing open until, Emmy?
So Jean Curtis, who's the district manager of Sealy Lake Sewer District, requested it be the second meeting in January, but when she heard that that was January 9th, she said that might be a little too soon, and she asked if there's a later date, so January 30th looks
Okay.
like when we will
Excellent.
have it.
We'll keep this open and revisit it on January 30th. All right. Any other business? Then we're all done. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.